morning. It's great to be here this morning. My wife Connie and I feel like this is really home for us, and we've had such warm greetings this morning. Kind of brought me to tears, but had to choke them back so my makeup wouldn't run in front of the cameras. But anyway, I'm excited to be able to be a part of this series on the Ten Commandments. We'll look at the second commandment this morning. In fact, let us get right to that. We'll start with Chariots of Fire, of course. Chariots of Fire. Chariots of Fire was a movie that portrays a true story about two British athletes vying for the 1924 Olympics. One of those, Eric Liddell, was a devout Christian and one of the fastest runners in the world. During the movie, his sister Jenny tries to talk him out of running and tries to encourage him to join the family on the mission field in China. Eric announces to her at this point that he's going to go to China, at which point she excitedly interrupts him by saying, "Oh, Eric, I'm so pleased." But Eric continues in this way, "But Jenny, I have a lot of running to do first. God has made me for a purpose, for China, but he has also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure." And then he concludes in this way, "To win is to honor him." To win is to honor him. Apparently, Eric Liddell realized that we were made to honor God. For Eric Liddell, it took competition to honor God. But when it comes to honoring God, there is no competition. And I believe our passage this morning will show us that, give us evidence of that fact. And our passage is in Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 to 6, where we see the second commandment God gave Moses, of the second of 10 commandments God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. This commandment actually has two parts to it, and then three reasons why to obey it. So let's take a look at this passage. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments." There are two parts to this commandment. One is don't use likenesses to worship God. Secondly, don't worship likenesses as idols. Two parts of really the same commandment. But before we delve into this passage, we need to do a little housekeeping, and that is to answer this question: what is the relevance of the Old Testament for us today? Why do we look at it? Why do we read it? Why do we study it? The Apostle Paul actually answered that question in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 when he cited the examples of Israelites who disobeyed God and whose bodies fell in the wilderness under Moses. And then in verse 6, he summarizes in this way: "Now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted." In other words, Paul is saying the Old Testament serves as examples for us. Thus, we need to learn from its instruction. This means our passage provides instruction to which we need to pay attention and follow. By doing so, God will provide blessing, and that will become evident as we get into this passage. If I were to sum up this passage, it would be this: honor God as God. Now, if you could remember one thing about this sermon, I hope you could remember this when you walk out of here. Honor God as God. Verse 4 tells us what we need to avoid in honoring God as God. Do not use any likenesses to worship God. In other words, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. That's pretty extensive. In other words, no likeness whatsoever as a help to worship God. Verse 4 forbids the production of any images or likeness of God for the purpose of worship. This includes things like statues, medals, pictures, crosses, to enhance your worship of God. Don't use anything not equal to God to worship him, because doing so degrades God and it demotes our faith. Using likenesses to worship God presents a picture of God as less than he is. Picturing God as less than he is lessens our faith, because we begin to believe in a God who is less than who he really is. Seeing God for who he is grows our faith in him, and as our faith grows, we grow, and God blesses. In recent years, there's been a help that was developed, came about over the last 20 years, that's called contemplative spirituality. It's a mouthful, but it includes darkness or nothingness promoted by contemplative spirituality. It's a help not created with the hands, but created in the mind. It's a dangerous help at using centering techniques to promote worship of God. It begins with a wordless prayer and involves breathing exercises and chanting of a sacred word or phrase. Now, according to an author of a book on contemplative spirituality, it begins with, stop thinking about God. And that's an odd way to worship God, in my opinion. Secondly, without moving your lips, repeat the sacred word or phrase inwardly, slowly, often. It's almost like transcendental meditation. The danger of this is it leads people away from the God of the Bible and away from his word, because contemplative spirituality presents God as one who accepts everyone and everything, regardless of their theology, regardless of their behavior, regardless of what they believe. He becomes the permissive parent who refuses to discipline his children for their good and ignores bad behavior and beliefs. Now, we need to beware of that. And the reason I put this next verse up is because I have actually heard of cases where somebody has been involved in contemplative spirituality. They feel it enhances their worship, and they tell another Christian who goes, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And God says, he calls his people to beware of inquiring after the gods of others, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I also will do likewise. There's a temptation when you hear of somebody who has what seems to be an enhanced experience. Instead, we need to worship God as God, the sovereign one, the King of all kings, the ruler of the universe. To see him in that way increases our faith in him, and it enables us to trust him in challenging times. An amplified faith, which stems from seeing God as he truly is, revering him in that way, makes it easier for us to believe his word. The more we believe his word, the more we will grow. The more we grow, the more God will bless. Therefore, honor God as God. Do not use any likeness to worship him, as all likenesses fall infinitely short of who he really is. It degrades him, and it demotes our faith. His uniqueness requires unique devotion to him. To honor God as God, do not worship false gods or idols. This is the second part of this command. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. This refers to serving likenesses of God. Serving likenesses of God is called idolatry. Do not serve idols. Idolatry is foolish because it is a product of human skill, and it's infinitely inferior to who God is. The foolishness of idolatry is on stage in Isaiah 40, verses 18 to 20, where God sarcastically instructs those who would create an idol. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare him? The workman molds an image. The goldsmith spreads it with gold. The silversmith casts silver chains. Whoever is too impoverished for such a contribution chooses a tree that will not rot. He seeks himself a skilled workman to prepare a carved image that will not taught her. In other words, God is instructing them, okay, if you're going to make a god, make an idol, make sure you go all out. Overlay it with gold. Bring in silver chains for it. But if you can't afford that, choose a tree that won't rot. And one that when you carve it, that won't fall over, because that's a real embarrassment when your God falls over like that. Well, what is an idol? Let's define it from the words of Jesus. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Thus, money can become an idol. But how? Well, an idol is something that competes with God in terms of time, focus, energy, resources, anything we elevate above its proper place, anything we trust in for our well-being, direction, fulfillment, and identity. It's anything we serve. From Jesus' words, we could ask, do we get our identity from money? In other words, do we try to show others who we are by what we purchase, drive, live in, or wear? Do we orient our lives to get more and more money? An idol can be money, it can be power, it can be career success, it can be fame, it can be hobbies, pleasure, appearance, social media, relationships, politics, or deep-seated desires that control, approve, or bring security. Idols promise fulfillment, but they ultimately will severely disappoint. Hobbies can be an idol by spending an inordinate amount of time on them, or putting much energy into them, or perfecting them, and even putting significant financial outlays into them. People can be idols, into whom we put all of our energy and focus, allowing them to dictate our responses while we make them the center of our lives. Again, what we trust in for our well-being, direction, fulfillment, or identity can be an idol. We need to ask the question, what or whom do we serve? Idols compete with God, and anything that competes with God does damage to us. So God gives us this command for our benefit. Idols lessen our faith, and they lead us away from God. So far, what we've learned is, don't use any representation of God as a help to worship him, for it degrades him and it demotes our faith. We should eliminate idols from our lives. There are good reasons to obey the instruction of these verses. The first of those is, God is a jealous God. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Now, that is different from the kind of jealousy we might think of in our own lives. This jealousy is not how we typically view the term jealousy. Our understanding of jealousy is a negative and destructive concept. That kind of jealousy destroys relationships, it harms oneself, and it controls one's emotions in a venomous manner. God's jealousy demands exclusive devotion to him. Devotion to God is not destructive, it is beneficial. It's what we were created to do and to experience. It is our fulfillment. Devoting ourselves to God brings fulfillment, greater joy, a superior purpose, and a deeper meaning to life, which other types of devotions can never produce. Now, here's another practical reason. Here's a very practical reason to honor God as God. If we do not honor God as God, he will visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. God will bring wrath upon those who do not honor him. As he says in 1 Samuel 2:30, those who despise me will be disrespected. God will not penalize a person for the wrongdoing of another. So let's clear that up. That's not what that passage is talking about. Here's what God says about that in Ezekiel 18:20. The son will not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked will be upon himself. So God doesn't bring wrath upon others for what we do. or he doesn't bring wrath upon us for what maybe our parents have done. Exodus 20, verse 5, deals with children who follow in the footsteps of their evil fathers. This is evident from the fact that those who hate me is in that verse, those who hate God. He visits the iniquity of the fathers and the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Children often do follow the examples of their fathers. So, for example, that's why we see generations of alcoholism in one family, or generations of gambling or divorce in certain families. Fathers who denigrate God by not honoring him as God teach their children to do the same with the same consequences. That's what God is referring to. These consequences refer to the temporal effects of sin. They're not related to where one will spend eternity. Now, God doesn't pour out his wrath in eternity. God brings his wrath here and now, and they don't affect our eternity. Our eternity is affected in terms of where we spend eternity by simply believing Jesus' promise of everlasting life. Jesus offers everlasting life, life with God forever, as a free gift to anyone who believes him for it, and at the moment you believe him for it, you have it forever. You cannot ever lose it. So this is not affecting where one spends eternity, but it can expect those who show hatred of God by pursuing false gods will over time experience consequences, and we'll see those consequences can affect in eternity in a certain way. God's jealousy is a call to loyalty to him. To compromise that loyalty is to hate him. It's to hold him in contempt. God gives us commands for our benefit, profiting our spiritual growth and bringing blessing to us. To not obey God brings consequences to us and to others. When the Israelites drifted from devotion to God to worship idols, they were beset with various diseases and even famine in the land. They were also conquered by their enemies and subjected to slavery. Disobeying God results in destruction of relationships. When we're devoted to God, we mature. We become humbler. We also become more loving, which works well in relationships. But if we slide from honoring God as God, we drift into immaturity, to jealousy, lack of self-control, which is destructive to relationships. It can also affect our work for the same reasons. It can also lead to financial stress, physical sickness. There are consequences for not honoring God as God. This pattern can run into the third and fourth generations. If children pick up this formula of behavior, they too will experience those same consequences. These consequences are called God's wrath. And again, God's wrath is temporal. It's here and now. It's not, God doesn't pour out his wrath in eternity. And Romans 1:18 gives us a clue to this when Paul writes, "For the wrath of God is revealed," is now, present tense, "from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth of unrighteousness." And then we also learn in Romans how God's wrath is affected. God sees individuals pursuing sin. They are not honoring God, and so God, like the old Burger King commercial, says, "Okay, have it your way," and he hands them over to the full consequences of their foolish pursuits. God shows his wrath to the third and fourth generations of those who foolishly refuse to honor God as God. But he shows his mercy to the thousandth generation of those who love him. God longs to show love and mercy. That's the kind of God he is. But showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. To love God is to obey him. As Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." That could also be translated, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." Or as Jesus later in that same chapter in John 14 says, "He who does not love me does not keep my commandments." Thus, to love God is to honor him in obedience. God will bless those who honor him. As he says in 1 Samuel 2:30, "For those who honor me, I will honor." That's a promise. The word thousands should be understood as an innumerable descendancy. The thousands we see in verse 6 is in contrast to the third and fourth generations of verse 5. The emphasis is on the descendants of faithfulness and God's revealing his goodness to them all. The effects of disobedience last for a long time, but the effects of God's love are far more extensive to 1,000 generations. God shows mercy to thousands of those who love him and keep his commandments, because God is a God of love and mercy. Now, God always acts with good and righteous intents. Consequences actually fall into that. Consequences are God's good and righteous allowances. If there were no consequences, people would continue their foolish pursuits and experience an even worse life here, and in a sense, a real sense, a worse life in eternity. Now, God tells us that he will judge all of us according to how our lives have honored him. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. As the psalmist wrote, you render to each one according to his work. Now, again, let's clarify. Where we spend eternity has everything to do with whether you have believed Jesus' offer of everlasting life. If you've believed him for that offer, you will be with God forever. But how we experience eternity has everything to do with how we honor God in this life. For we must, and Paul tells us this, here's a judgment that Paul's describing that all believers, all of us who have believed Jesus, will go to. And he says, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things in the body according to what he has done, whether good or evil. In other words, a broad array, whether it's the best or whether it's the most wicked, we will have to give an account to the Lord Jesus. Again, that doesn't determine where we spend eternity, but it determines the kind of blessing and reward and fulfillment and joy we will experience in eternity. Benefits of consequences. For believers, current consequences can bring a better experience at the judgment seat of Christ. In other words, if we experience consequences from foolishly not honoring God as we should, well, then we hopefully will be brought back into a close relationship with God as a result of experiencing those consequences, and hopefully we finish well, and that will bring a much better response at the judgment seat of Christ. Consequences can cause people to hit bottoms in their sinful pursuits. So hopefully if we hit bottom, we respond by turning to God. It can also teach others who see those consequences, like Proverbs 21:11 says, when the scoffer is punished, the simple is made wise. So the simple may not even have to go through those consequences if he or she views the consequences of others. Now, God brings consequences, but he also brings blessing to all who love him. And here's God's intent, indicated in Deuteronomy 5:29. Oh, that they had such a heart in them that they would fear me and always keep my commandments, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. That's what God desires for us, that it might be well with us and our children for all eternity. To the 1,000th generation, those who honor God will impact others even down to the 1,000th generations. That brings me to another movie. It's the movie called The Inn of the Sixth Happiness. You probably all think all I do is watch movies. But anyway, this is a true story about Gladys Aylward, who was an English woman who became a faithful missionary in a remote region in North China. When Gladys went to China, she had no vocation and no experience there as a missionary, and so the China Inland Mission Center refused to sponsor her. Well, that didn't dissuade her, so in 1932, she set out to get a connection in China, and she got a job at an inn for traveling mule drivers, only in China and only in 1932. But the manager of that inn died, who himself was a seasoned missionary, and as a result, China sent a letter to Gladys indicating to her that because of her lack of experience, they were going to cut off funding for the inn. So now Gladys had no job, no money, no friends, and was living in an isolated country with its share of problems. But Gladys persevered, believing that she was being obedient to God as she believed God wanted her to be there. Her perseverance paid off. As a result, she was able to lead a Mandarin village governor to faith in Jesus Christ. And as a result of his position in that village, he impacted others, and others believed in Jesus Christ. And when the Japanese army attacked China, Gladys led over 100 orphan children to safety through the mountains, evading enemy soldiers. Her experience had a great impact upon those children and even on the descendants of those children. That's what honoring God can do. It can impact even to the thousandth generation. So our passage tells us this: honor God as God. When it comes to honoring God, there is no competition. Let us not use any likeness to worship God. Let us not erect idols in our lives. Instead, let us trust God alone. Let us honor God as God. Now, you may have some questions as a result of this message, and so Bob Bryan will be here to answer those for you. Now, I'll be up here if you want to come and talk to me. I'd love to talk with you. Well, let's close our time together with a word of prayer. Our Father, we're so very grateful for who you are, that you're a God of mercy and love. You desire the very best for us. And as we honor you as God, you will provide the best and give us great blessing, both here and throughout eternity. And so, Father, help us to honor you as who you are. And thank you for hearing us and for the perfect ways in which you'll answer. Amen.